Welcome and thank you for joining. We will begin the presentation shortly as we wait for people to enter the webinar. We're so glad that you were able to join us today. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. We will begin shortly as we wait for everyone to enter the webinar. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to our webinar, Resources for State-Level Science and Engineering Decision-Making. My name is Amy Burke. I am the Program Director of the Science and Engineering Indicators Program for the National Center for Science and Engineering Statistics, known as NCSES. NCSES is the National Science Foundation statistical agency and one of the 13 principal statistical agencies throughout the federal government. We gather and disseminate data in a policy-neutral and objective way to track the state of science and engineering in the United States and analyze how we compare internationally and also across our states nationally. As part of our mission, we work with the National Science Board to produce a series of resources that provide data on indicators of the state of the U.S. science and engineering enterprise, known as Science and Engineering Indicators, or indicators for short. The indicators data are intended to contribute to an understanding of the current S&E environment. They show trends in various focus areas, including STEM education, the trends in our STEM labor force, research and development in both industry and academia, innovation, and public perceptions of science and technology. In today's webinar, we are going to give you an overview of the State Indicators tool, as well as some of our other resources that specifically highlight state-level data. But before we begin, I just want to say welcome again to those of you who have just joined us. And I want to do a little bit of housekeeping. We are recording this webinar. There is not an open chat for the Zoom, but we do have a Q&A box, which you can access at the bottom of your screen. Also, during the hour, we invite you to submit questions, which we may be able to respond to in real time through the Q&A function. And at the end of our discussion, we will leave time to answer additional questions live as well. So let's get started. And I just want to ask each of our panelists to first introduce themselves. So first, Maureen.
Hello, everyone. I'm Maureen Kondik. I'm the National Science Board Science and Engineering Policy Vice Chair, and I'm an Associate Professor of Neurobiology and Anatomy at the University of Utah School of Medicine. So NSB's Science and Engineering Policy Committee oversees the development of and production of the congressionally mandated science and engineering indicators that Amy just mentioned, in collaboration with the NCSES. Indicators is a key way in which the NSB fulfills its obligation to provide information and policy advice to Congress and to the President on science and engineering research, education, and the workforce. It's also a wonderful resource for the public and for policymakers outside of the President and Congress.
Thank you, Maureen. Erin.
Thanks, happy to be here. My name is Erin Heath, and I am Director of Federal Relations at AAAS, that's the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the world's largest general scientific society, and also the publisher of Science in the Science family of journals. I work in the AAAS Office of Government Relations, which helps to provide objective information on science and technology to lawmakers and assist scientists and engineers in understanding the policy process and landscape. I also have the privilege of serving as one of the 4 co-chairs of the Coalition for National Science Funding. CNSF is an alliance of around 140 professional organizations, universities, and businesses united in their support of strong and sustained funding for the National Science Foundation and its many important research and education programs. Thank you.
Thanks, Erin. And Vipin.
Thank you, Amy, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Vipin Arora. I'm the Deputy Director here at the National Center for Science and Engineering Statistics within NSF. And it is a real privilege to be here to talk to you today because, I've spent a lot of my career as a researcher and analyst working with data, working with different kinds of data. And so it's exciting, that we talk about this tool, the state indicator tool we're going to talk about. It's just exciting to be able to show you a tool to demonstrate the power, of technology and the granular data that we have available in it. So I think it'll be a great conversation. I think hopefully you'll find it as engaging as we all will here. So thanks, Amy, and back over to you.
Thanks, Vipin. Welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for being here for this important discussion. I just want to say one more time, thank you to our attendees, as some new people have been joining us during the introductions. And I just want to point out that we do have a Q&A function if you have questions during our discussion. So let's jump right in. I'd like to start with you, Vipin. Could you give everyone some background and tell everyone a bit about NCSCS and what the indicators data is all about?
Yeah, thanks, Amy. I mean, so Amy touched on it for those of you who weren't here, towards the beginning, and that so NCSCS, we're NSF statistical agency. We're also part of this group of 13 so-called principal federal statistical agencies. Other names you may have heard that are part of that group are like the Census Bureau, the Bureau of Economic Analysis, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, for example. Each of us has a different and a distinct mission across the 13. And so the NCSCS mission covers the entire breadth of the science and engineering enterprise. So you can think about how big that is. I always like to say, when I think of the sectors in the U.S. economy, what sector does science and engineering not have an impact on or affect? That's how broad it is. Every aspect of the economy, every aspect of a lot of different areas is covered by our mission. And as part of that mission, we also have the privilege of working both with and in support of the National Science Board and the National Science Board Office and other parts of NSF. And part of that is in producing, whether it's supporting the production of science and engineering indicators reports, or the state indicators tool that we're talking about today. That whole suite of products, which I think is, I think of it as world class, just top of the line in terms of the type of information that it provides. And in particular, state indicators I like because it allows us to get to that granular level that a lot of our stakeholders are interested in and want to see. And so I won't hold up anymore, but that's where we'll go in terms of the state data. And as I mentioned before, really excited to share that all with you all. Amy?
Thanks, Vipin. So yes, and as the director of the indicators program, I can vouch for the sheer amount of data that we gather and the expertise that the NCSCS analysts bring to the table in this area. We have a high level of talent on our teams. So, just to recap, NCSCS gathers this data. We do it in a policy neutral way, but I want to turn now to Maureen and ask her, Maureen, can you talk to us about how NSB uses this data, how they view the data and what these data, the value of it to the role that you have on the board?
Yes, of course. So the National Science Board has 2 major functions. First is to establish the policies of the National Science Foundation. And second is to serve as an independent body of advisors to both the president and to the Congress on policy matters related to science and engineering, or the S&E enterprise. So in the second role, we are primarily responsible for producing the biennial Science and Engineering Indicators Report, which is the most comprehensive source of high quality federal data on the state of US science and engineering in a global context. We also produce a fair number of policy pieces designed to provide data-driven policy advice to Congress and to the President on S&E research, education, and workforce issues. So for both our reports and for our policy pieces, we rely extremely heavily on the NCSCS to provide us with accurate, comprehensive, and objective data that's relevant to the priorities that have been established by the board and to the interests of the nation most broadly defined. So the NSB and the NCSCS work together in an interdependent, collaborative manner to ensure that policymakers and the public have access to the highest quality, most trustworthy information on these important topics. And the new Science and Engineering State Indicators tool that we're discussing today, that's been developed by the NCSCS, is a fantastic resource for accessing this information and for visualizing it in a wide range of formats that are easy to understand, easy to interpret, and easy to apply to a wide range of important policy questions. So we collaborate with the NCSCS, but we are independent agencies, and we see them as just amazing colleagues in this important effort to get this information out as broadly as possible to the public, to lawmakers, and to everyone else who has any kind of interest in it. Back to you, Amy.
Thanks, Maureen. I agree. This is and thank you both to you and Vipin for giving the overviews of both NCSCS and NSB. And I think you hit on the theme that we're going to come back to, is that this is a really great collaborative relationship that we have, and we both each have our separate functions, but we bring them together in a way that I think really helps shed light on some of the policy issues out there. But for the state data specifically, the question often revolves around how people can find this data. So we have gathered years and years of data. So many of you may be saying, where is it? And so to that end, we would like to show a couple of short demos that illustrate how easy and accessible this data truly is. We've recently upgraded and redesigned the interface to make the data very accessible and easy to use. So here is the first demo of our state indicators tool.
Welcome to part 1 of the National Center for Science and Engineering Statistics overview of the State Indicators tool. NCSCS provides approximately 60 indicators for multiple years across all 50 states and Puerto Rico. The top of the home page has 2 boxes entitled Indicators on the left and State Data on the right. For part 1 of this demonstration, I will explore the functionality under Indicators by clicking Explore Indicators. The indicators are grouped by 6 general S&E subject areas: K-12, higher education, workforce, R&D inputs, R&D outputs, and science and technology in the economy. Select an indicator by clicking on the box. Here I will click engineers as a percentage of all occupations. Select full description to see the full description and data source for the indicator. Under the description paragraph, there are 4 display options. The first is Map. By bringing my cursor over a state, I see the data for each state. Click on the Chart tool, shows the data in line graphs. Here, the dotted line for each state shows the national average, and the solid line shows that state's data over time. When you hover over a particular state, you see the data as you move from left to right. Click on Bar Chart to see the bar chart for all states. You can change years by clicking under Display Year. Click on Table to see the data as a table. You can organize by alphabetical or from highest to lowest for any given year. The tool also gives you the option to print any visualization that you see on your screen. In addition, you can download the data and standard errors when they exist. And next, we will talk about the Compare button in part 2 of our State Indicator Tool demonstration. Thank you.
So I hope that it's evident to everyone that the time and effort we recently put into restructuring this tool really shows in the increased functionality and accessibility of the data and visualizations. It is very powerful. So Erin, I want to talk to you as staff of the AAAS. You work with people across the country. In light of the data and functionality of our state indicators tool, what and how can people at the state level benefit from this information?
Thanks for that question, Amy. Well, I'll start by saying that science policy professionals and advocates like the people who represent CNSF member organizations, they use these tools, well, for one thing with federal policymakers, members of Congress and their staffs to show what's going on back home in the districts. So this is very important to a congressional office, right? Members of Congress are elected to represent their districts, and certainly helps them to learn more about the research and the education and the workforce that's relevant to their states and localities. We are also big fans of the downloadable fact sheets. They're pretty to look at, you can hold them, you can email them, and most importantly, they are brief, which is key for busy decision makers who benefit from having the most relevant points condensed down to a page or two so that the information is easy to understand and visualize and remember. These tools are also useful for policy and advocacy work back home. So anyone can visit with their congressional office back in their own communities. It doesn't have to be in DC. And these tools are handy with state and local policymakers who are also dealing with all sorts of issues that sit at the intersection of science and society. I'll give another example of how we use this data at AAAS. We have an annual science policy workshop for STEM students. It's called the CASE workshop, and that CASE, by the way, stands for Catalyzing Advocacy in Science and Engineering. And it's a multi-day overview of science policy. And at the end of it, at least in non-pandemic times, students have the option of scheduling meetings with their congressional offices in DC. And we advise the students to do their homework, research the members of Congress with whom they'll be meeting and their districts. And the first question that tends to pop up is, where do we start? So we can point them to the NSB and NSF resources so they can start to develop a solid picture of the STEM landscape in each state.
Yeah, that does sound really helpful. Just from some of the time that I spent working at state level, I can see where that can come into play. So Erin, you mentioned local governments and congressional representatives. So let me direct this question to Maureen. What can be done with the data in terms of policy when you're thinking about these kind of interactions at this level?
Well, the data is actually incredibly useful for thinking about policy and for formulating policy, precisely because, as both Vipin and Erin have emphasized, it's so granular and it's so specific to individual circumstances and individual situations. So the NSB's recently published document Vision 2030 articulates a number of priorities for strengthening the nation's science and engineering enterprise, including expanding the geography of innovation, developing STEM talent for all Americans, delivering research benefits to society, and fostering an interactive and equitable global scientific community. So in order to develop STEM talent and innovation in all regions of the country, the first two priorities that the NSB has identified, we really need to tailor our approach to local conditions. So the S&E landscape in Alabama or in Illinois is unlikely to be quite exactly the same as the landscape, say, in California or in Massachusetts. As a consequence, we really the utility of nationwide aggregate data is really limited for crafting policy that's effective in different contexts. So the new state indicators tool isn't restricted to broad national level data, but rather it allows policymakers, citizens, and also the National Science Board itself to look very rigorously at specific regions of the country and at individual states. And this kind of detailed, granular data helps to identify the challenges and the opportunities that are presented by different circumstances at the local level, and to craft programs and policies that are appropriate to diverse situations across the nation. So for example, in my home state of Utah, we are somewhat below the national and regional averages for S&E degrees awarded, but we are either at or above the national and local averages for S&E occupations as a percentage of the total workforce. So this suggests that Utah is doing a good job at attracting and retaining S&E workers, but that there's room for improvement in educating and developing our own local talent. And these are the kinds of insights that you can gain to consider what are the appropriate steps forward on a regional or local level for enhancing productivity, innovation, and increasing the economic impact of STEM activities in your region. Amy, back to you.
Maureen, that was great. It's really great to hear from you guys to think about all the different ways that these data can be used. So let's just keep this going and expand on this idea of drilling down to local issues and local populations. One of the great functionalities of our state indicators tool is that it is easy to compare your state to other states that are similar in size or that are within the same region, or whatever sort of purpose you would want to use this for. So with this in mind, let's take a look at our second demo, which illustrates this powerful capability.
Welcome to part 2 of the National Center for Science and Engineering Statistics overview of the State Indicators Data Tool. This demonstration will focus on the tool's State Data function, which houses a powerful way to compare indicators between states. Select the button labeled Compare States on the right-hand box on the main page. The first thing you will see upon entering is a list of U.S. jurisdictions. To begin, choose a state. Each state page is pre-populated with several default indicators. The first button you see under the headings is a drop-down label with the name of the state. Choose that button, and you will see a drop-down of available states to compare. Click the box to compare a state or select a preset option. I will select similar states by bachelor's degree holders, and then select Compare button below the list of states. You will see a display comparing the data for the selected states for the 3 default indicators. There are several visualizations to choose from, including the line chart. Move the cursor along the line to show the data by year. A bar chart highlights the data, and the selected states are colored in orange. To change the display here, use the drop-down, or select to show as a table with the chosen states highlighted in green. If you would like to compare an additional indicator, look at the lower right-hand corner and click Add Indicators. Select an area you would like to add, such as engineers as a percentage of all occupations. You may also remove an indicator by clicking on a check. At the bottom, select Add Selected Indicators. and you will see the indicators you have chosen. You can select to print and create output of the visualizations exactly as they are displayed, or select download to download the indicator data and the input data along with any standard errors. The menu along the top of the Science and Engineering Indicators tool provides further assistance with help, overview, and technical notes. Select Science and Engineering State Indicators on the left-hand side to return to the home page. We are continually updating the science indicators data and seeking ways to improve the functionality of these tools. We encourage your feedback on ways to make this data more accessible. Feedback buttons are on the footer of every page. We thank you for your viewing of this brief introduction of the NCSES Science and Engineering State Data Indicators tool.
So as I said before, as someone who worked at the state level myself in the past, I would have loved to have this kind of access to a tool like this to look up and compare science and engineering capabilities across the states. Something that, I was just thinking about the functionality of being able to take the visualizations directly out of those, maybe put them in a PowerPoint presentation or be able to print those out to hand out, how helpful that would be in those sorts of situations at the state level. This really is a powerful tool. So I kind of want to go to Vipin now to talk a little bit more about these visualizations available here and how they really come alive in the compare mode.
I mean, Amy, that's a great way to say the team at NCSES knows I love visualizations. As I say that, I'm like, who doesn't love visualizations? It's like saying I love chocolate. But yeah, so, I love visualizations. And you got so many different ones here that you can choose from. Karen, in the video walkthrough, you've got the map, and you've got the time series, and then you can compare across that time series, the different time series that replace the states. You've got the bar charts. You've even got, if you go on the landing page, you can get the spark lines, the little small kind of lines with the dot at the end. So you've got a tremendous amount of different types of visualizations, and it's so easy to get to. So as Maureen did, I like to kind of play around with it and see what are some indicators I'm interested in, and what what do I see, and when I kind of you just muck around the tool a little bit. And one thing I noticed, like I went to that Explore Indicators. So you go to the landing page, you go to Explore Indicators, and I just picked an indicator I know we at NCSES are interested in. I know the board has a lot of interest, that is in terms of foreign-born scientists and engineers. And there's a particular indicator there, foreign-born workers, as a percentage of individuals in science and engineering occupations. So I thought that's a really interesting one, right? So what's the share of foreign-born workers in terms of science and engineering occupations by state at the granular level? So I was able to kind of open up the map. You click on that, you look at the map, and right away you can see in quartiles. That's the power of the visualization. Who's in the higher quartiles, who's in the lower quartiles. So I, of course, naturally went to, the great state of Illinois, my home state, and wanted to see what's our share. And it turns out that our share is roughly 25, I say our, I live in Virginia, but, it's always like ours when we talk about Illinois, but like 25% roughly. It's a little bit above the national average. And you can do this for all kinds of states, and you can hover over them like Karen showed on the map. And it's just a really powerful kind of feature. The other thing, so then I was like, well, I know Maureen's from Utah, Aaron's from Pennsylvania. I wonder what cool indicators that we could talk about from there. So I went back to the landing page, went over to the state data, the right-hand side, and said, let me pick 2 states and compare them and look at that. And so, was able to do that. And there I went to a different indicator. There's the standard ones, and you can add some. Bachelor's degree in science and engineering per 1,000 individuals 18 to 24 years old. Well, that's a long title. bachelor's degrees in science and engineering conferred per 1,000 individuals 18 to 24 years old. And it turns out in the comparison, you can see in the time series that Utah in 2019, well above the national average, about almost 32%, almost 32%. And Pennsylvania is up there too, almost 30%. National average is closer to like 23.5. So just some kind of fun facts that you can quickly explore. And I think you can spend, a long time just playing around with some of the facts and some of the data that's available and easy to see because of the visualizations, Amy.
Thank you. Just the policy implications of hearing just those little snippets of data just alone are incredible to think about. And, Aaron, it's been awesome to hear from you from the perspective of a user and some of our users that are out there. So can you talk a little bit about how you think these visualizations can really help some of the people that you interact with all the time who are advocating for science in their localities?
Certainly. Thanks, Amy. Well, as we've discussed, this data can be very handy for the local level. One of the points that we tend to make is a lot of policy and advocacy work is done at the local level. For example, in school boards or neighborhood advisory committees. And it's nice to be able to download information and share it and see it, as the demos have shown, in a variety of different formats. And also to be able to see how states are doing in relation to each other. Again, the one-pagers are handy because they're brief and they're nice to look at, and they work hand in hand with the state fact sheets that NSF produces that focus on investments and specific projects. And we can then point folks to these great online visualization tools and let them explore. So the NSB and NSF have provided a wealth of information. And I wanted to say too, I've been involved in efforts by organizations to create similar resources in the past. And I don't know if people always know this, but it's hard work. These resources are hard to produce, design, and maintain annually. So we know the challenges involved. And we really greatly appreciate the NSB and NSF investment in sharing this information in such an accessible way.
Thanks, Aaron. We really do value this data, and we do work hard to keep it updated. These just to mention, the state indicators are actually updated on a rolling basis. So please check back periodically. We update these several times a year as data are available. So Maureen, how else can these data be used, and why is science important at the state level?
Well, I think it should be really clear to our audience that the data can be used in an enormous variety of different ways. As I noted earlier, the S&E landscape is really quite diverse across the nation, with both challenges and opportunities being specific to the local situation. So as demonstrated in the video, the data available through the State Indicators tool really allows you to look at your state and to compare your situation to other states in your region, to compare it to other states with similar populations or with similar economies, or a number of parameters that might be particularly relevant to questions that you have or to policy you're trying to develop. And the truly beautiful thing about this is that you're not forced to wade through a really dense table with hundreds of panels and columns and rows if you don't want to. If you need that data, you have access to it. But if you're really looking for something more intuitive, something that's going to make the point or illustrate the situation clearly, you can do that with just a click. And that is just tremendously powerful because it's not simply a visualization. It's a visualization that's based on solid information and data. So in addition to providing a far more relevant information than would be available from national statistics, the availability of location-specific data opens up new questions that are prompted by the data itself. In the example I gave earlier of Utah, the data enables state legislatures and other policymakers to really consider how it is that we can continue to attract S&E talent to the state of Utah, something we're doing pretty well, but also to consider what we can do to graduate more Utahns with S&E degrees. So the data can help inform state level investment decisions about what needs to be done, within the local educational systems to promote the development of local economies or to address specific challenges that exist within your community. So any questions that you're asking are freed by the data to be factually driven rather than politically driven, which I think increases the credibility of those questions very substantially.
Yeah, thank you, Maureen. It is just to think about the sheer amount of data that we have and how you can use it is incredible. And we even have more. And so earlier, Aaron mentioned the NSB State One pagers, which can be found on the National Science Board's website. I would like to ask Vipin to talk about some other resources that we have where people can access state level data.
Would love to, Amy. So we've got lots. I mean, there's a lot, and but I'll give you three examples. So the first is NCSES has state profiles as well, and these are full statistical overviews for each state. And I know a lot of you out there are thinking, well, what's the difference between what you're showing us now, the state indicators, and the NCSES state profiles? And I would think of them as complementary tools, because there's so much information, so much granular information available that having it all in one place can be challenging, particularly when you want to make things easy to use and easy to understand. So these are two complementary sources. So one is the state indicators website that we're talking about today, but there's also the NCSES state profiles. In addition, for those of you who do like the 17 panel table that Maureen was talking about, we've got our great state data tool. This is where a lot of our survey data tool at NCSES, a lot of our power users go in here, and you just click on what you want, pick survey, and you can download a table. You can actually visualize things in that survey data tool as well. It's a great resource for folks who want to get really deep into the data. I mean, you can get in there and get out pretty quick too, but you can really go deep at the state level and many of our surveys in that survey data tool. So that, Amy, is another resource. And then Aaron, the third one I'll talk about. Aaron briefly mentioned this. The NSF has state fact sheets. So these are really cool. Like you can go to once you go to the website, and we'll have the resources, I think, in the chat. The links to all this stuff posted, and you can pick out like really cool facts from these fact sheets. So like, I talked about Illinois, I talked about Pennsylvania and Utah. I didn't want Amy to feel left out, so let me say something about her home state of Kentucky. All right. So did you know that NSF invested nearly $2 million in startups in Kentucky? All right. So $2 million almost in Kentucky. Amy, did you know that? You look surprised. Yeah. Almost 39 million in total NSF awards to Kentucky. So there you go, Kentucky, a little bit of love. I'll throw out a few more stats since I did the research. Colorado, because I've always wanted to live in Boulder. NSF invested I think a little bit over 7.3 million in Colorado startups in 2021. So a bit more than Kentucky did, than Kentucky got in that year. So it's just a taste of the different facts and the different granular information we have, Amy.
Yeah, thanks. I'm looking at some of the questions in the chat, and in addition to the state level data, we've begun to start producing some county level data. Some people seem to be interested in that, and we put a link in the chat if you want to go to our Invention, Knowledge Transfer, and Innovation report that was released in March of this year. There's some county level data there on patents and trademarks. So we invite you to explore some of that data. And I think that Maureen, you touched on this, but let's kind of get back to this idea of a question that sometimes comes up from the public's perspective. You talked about how the objectivity of our data is very important, because some people can potentially be somewhat suspicious of statistics and data gathering. So Maureen, could you maybe elaborate a little bit more on that, and what would you say to those people?
Absolutely, and I think skepticism is warranted. Statistics are very complicated, and they are often used to justify a preordained conclusion by many people, but not by the National Science Board or the NCSES. So I want the possibility that data can be influenced by political or policy considerations is a real concern. And yet I want to reiterate that although the National Science Board and the NCSES work closely together to define the types of data that would be most relevant to specific policy issues, we are fully independent agencies. The NCSES is charged with the mission of generating data that's independent of any stated goal. And this data is collected rigorously and objectively according to the highest professional standards in the field. The NCSES, once it has collected this data, provides it to the NSB without interpretation, simply as data that can draw its own conclusions. And once the board has this objective evidence in hand, it's our job to use that data to advise policymakers on S&E issues. Importantly, the policy recommendations of the NSB are driven by the data and not the other way around. Although members of the NSB are appointed by the president for up to 2 6-year terms, the NSB itself is not a political entity. Our mission is to provide reliable, data-supported policy recommendations to the president and to the Congress. And in my experience, the board exclusively considers what the data tells us, what is in the interest of the S&E enterprise, and what is in the interest of the nation in making our recommendations. So the public can truly trust that the data available through the indicators resource and through the NSB's suite of publications is objective and unbiased and is driving the policy. The policy is not driving the data.
Thanks, Maureen. Yeah, I agree. You know, I think that that is one of the strengths of this collaborative partnership. We have this separation of the data and the policy. You use the data to inform your policy recommendations, but the data are not influenced by a preconceived policy perspective or expectation, as you mentioned. And I just want to let everyone know, we just issued another indicators report this week on the knowledge and technology intensive industries, production and output from these industries that invest heavily in R&D. And our final 2 reports of the 2022 indicators will be coming out next week and on May 4th. The first one is on research and development in the US and globally. And the last one will be on the public perceptions of science and technology. So we hope that you'll continue to come back to our website and explore not just the state indicators, but also our broader suite of products and indicators. And I just want to let you know, in one of our videos, we mentioned that there's a feedback tool. And just as we spend a lot of time redesigning our user interface here to make it more accessible, we want to make sure that our data continue to meet our stakeholder needs. This is really important to us. You are the ones who use these data. We put this out there for you. And so please use that feedback tool. We would love to hear from you. And please keep coming back to the tool and seeing what new things might be coming. So this is our overview of how you can access the data that is available to you. I think that we've put the website in the chat. And so now we'd like to address some of your questions. So if you have any questions, I think we've been answering many of them live, but if you have some that you would like to ask of the panelists directly, please post them in the Q&A box, and we will try to answer as many as we have in the time we have left. So I am looking at some of the questions right now, and it looks like most of them have been fielded. So I just would like to invite the panelists, if you had any final remarks that you would want to share with this group, anything else you want to add, that would be, concluding remarks.
Amy, if I could just encourage everyone that the feedback from stakeholders as you use the data, I think that's a great point I'd like to emphasize, is that we use that, we take that in, whether it's how the site is laid out, whether it's the kind of information that we have, whether there's certain gaps that you want to see filled. that's great information for us to get. So we would love to get that feedback from you, if at all possible.
Yeah, and I would like to reinforce what Vipin just said, that in my experience, the NCSCS has been incredibly responsive to feedback. So if there are things you want to see, if there's an analysis that would be helpful, we can't guarantee we could jump on it right away, but they will certainly take it seriously and do their best to try to provide whatever information is most useful to you, the stakeholders, if it's possible. So definitely use the feedback and tool and use the data. I think we have better policy and a healthier nation and a healthier S&E enterprise if the questions are informed by the evidence.
And I would just echo my fellow panelists, and I would encourage all of you watching to go online, explore these tools, and have fun with it. Have fun learning. There's so much to learn.
Yeah, I agree. And I want to also let everyone know that we do have, so we will have another update of our data for the state indicators tool in May, and including 2 new indicators on employment in knowledge technology intensive industries. And that will be coming out. That will be coming out end of May, early June on the state indicator. So this will be a new one. This was introduced in our latest thematic report on these industries. So this includes employment, and I think it could be very telling, and have a lot of policy relevance for many of the things that you might have, in your purview. So I just want to say thank you, everyone, for joining us, and thank you to our panelists. It's been a very informative webinar. Thank you so much for being a part of the presentation, and we hope you can use and benefit from the resources we've outlined today. Please share this information with your colleagues, and we just want to wish everyone that you have a great day, and keep coming back and checking out the website. We look forward to your feedback. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.